cool. Thank you guys for joining us tonight. We have about 100, little over 140 people that are registered. I always look at that and I say, well, we'll have like 30 to 40 people show up live. And then we'll also have, oh my gosh, we usually almost double the attendance by we have the recorded podcast, and we also have this webinar recorded. So this is very cool. Carter is our master of ceremonies, hiding behind our Committed to Change logo. I'm Sarah Cooperman. I'm the CEO of SCW Fitness Education. What I'd like you to do is move your mouse and go to the bottom of the screen. Go to the left button. It's a chat box. Please click on it. Put your first name, where you're from. We love to know where you're coming from around the country. That is always intriguing to us. And I want you to know that I watched the chat box. So if you spent your valuable time and are joining us tonight, if you would like, type your questions in, type your comments in, and we'll address them. We'd love to hear from you. We've got some great people with us today. We are going to be talking about time-optimized workouts to bust your busy schedule. And we're going to be talking a lot about HIIT workouts and micro workouts, body weight exercises to help our clients overcome time constraints and also keep them committed to their New Year's resolutions. I think that's very important. We have Dr. Aaron, and I hate the last name. Do it for me. Do it for me. Thank you. Okay. He's the director of exercise science and an assistant professor at the Crown College in Minnesota. In this role, he teaches courses on traditional on-campus exercise science, as well as being the program director for the online Masters of Science in Exercise Science and Sports Performance. He's also very actively involved with ACSM and currently serves on the Exercise Physiologist Committee and also served on the conference committee for the ICAA, the International Council on Active Aging. And we have Greg Johnson with us. He's a fitness studio owner. He's got 20 years experience in health and exercise. He holds a bachelor's of science degree in fitness and rehab with minors in health and wellness. He also has a master's of kinesiology with a concentration in performance enhancement and injury prevention. And then we have Dr. Jonathan Mike, and he currently serves in the Exercise Science and Sports Performance program at the Grand Canyon University in Phoenix. He's worked as a strength and conditioning coach. He's presented at dozens of online fitness and strength consumer outlets. He also has done like 85 different talks at different conventions all over the world. He's written 12 or 13 book chapters. The poor guy doesn't have any experience in the industry. So we've got these amazing educators that both have practical experience and also have theoretical training and train others. So this is kind of exciting. I've got Peggy from Cleveland. I don't know where Helen's from, or Jackie, or Maria, or Nan, or Dawn, but I'm so glad you guys have joined us. And again, type your questions in, you have them. We're going to start with a question, and Aaron, I'm shooting this at you, sir. How can we effectively design and implement HIIT workouts, high intensity interval training workouts, for our clients to achieve significant results in a minimal amount of time?
Yeah, I'm going to approach it a little bit from the cardiorespiratory standpoint. I'll turn it over to some of the other guests as far as the resistance training aspect goes. But the first thing I always think about when I think about high-intensity interval training is we often think of it as this really high, all-out sprinting effort followed by a rest period of some sort. And that work-to-rest ratio tends to vary depending on what you want to accomplish. But the one thing I always talk about, especially a lot of my previous life was working with older adults prior to being in education. And it doesn't, depending upon the level of the individual that you're working with, it doesn't have to be these all out sprints followed by a rest period. For some people, you could start out with higher intensity walking, whether that be walking at a higher speed or walking at a higher incline on the treadmill. and still start to see some of the same types of benefits from high intensity interval training, which we know is generally speaking considerably less time doing the exercise, with the similar or same results to what we would call modern intensity continuous training. So one of the big aspects for me is that I think about is kind of meeting that client where they are and still being able to experience some of the same benefits of high intensity interval training. Like I said, could be even in a walking standpoint. It does not have to be these all out sprints. So
All right, very cool. And John, I was going to ask you, Dr. Mike, if could you give us a little summary of what HIIT training actually is? Because I think Aaron brought up some really good points. It's cardiovascular training, it's strength training, it's recovery. How do we balance this? How do we measure it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a wide variety of actual like physiological adaptations like with HIIT. And I think because over the last, probably 3 or 4 years, it's actually been largely misinterpreted. And I think people are very misguided on what HIIT really is. Most people think HIIT is just getting your heart rate up, right? Or just some type of higher exercise intensity. And while that's true in terms of exercise intensity, it should be better defined as exercise intensity at around somewhere between like 80 to 90+% of like your VO2 max, right? Where like zone 3 or zone 4, cardiovascular intensity, and it could be like zone 2, for example, what's 50 to 60, maybe upwards of 70% of percent heart rate. But it's been largely misinterpreted, and people think just doing some burpees and doing some mountain climbers for 30 seconds and then going to the next exercise and doing something for 30 seconds is constituted as HIIT. Like it's actually more specific in terms of training guidelines. And yeah, Aaron's correct. I mean, you can't really totally separate the aerobic and the anaerobic types of adaptations. Like you do get like aerobic adaptations. You do get not only increases in blood flow and mitochondrial capillary density, but you also get some of the anaerobic, benefits as well, because you're training all energy systems with phosphagen, glycolytic, mitochondrial respiration. And even during normal like resistance training and there's no HIIT, like you still use all energy systems. So it's highly dependent on intensity and really duration. So I think HIIT's been like very misguided and misunderstood by not only general public, but a lot of these silly influencers that you see online that are just doing some random workouts that are not very structured and just calling it HIIT just so they can get views and clicks and perhaps, sell you stuff that doesn't really work. So again, there's different physiological benefits and adaptations. So that's kind of how my overall answer.
And I love that you brought up, the Instagram people. I just was on a talk show, the Talks and Takes talk show, which is a great talk show. And I actually highlighted the Planet Fitness new ad that features Megan the Stallion on it, which is awesome. And it's like 30 seconds, but it's really cool. And she's calling out FitsPro fakes, FITSPRO, which is that the Fitspiration people, the people that are gorgeous bodies that are inspiring you to do these HIIT workouts. And it's like, who are they? Are they certified? Are they trained? And what are they bringing to the table? So what are some, I'm going to ask you, Greg, what are some creative and effective micro workouts that we can incorporate into our client sessions, regardless of location or equipment availability?
Yeah, I think when I talk with my clients, that's actually one of the conversations I have with them is if you're not in the gym, what do you have available to you? And like some people have nothing, so we got to work on body weight. So I kind of agree with what Aaron said. It depends on who you're working with. I think I have a large demographic of people that come into the gym, and not everyone can actually do high intensities. Or for some people, just walking up the hill in their neighborhood would be a higher intensity. So I really kind of talk to people, make sure I know what they have available to them. It could be resistance training, or it could be a hill at the local park, and we'll find out, okay, what do you have available to you? What are you willing to do? And how much time do you have? And that's kind of how we'll start designing the program.
Oh, that's great. And having a goal in mind obviously provides that motivation. And sometimes it's, attending a son's wedding. Sometimes it's getting ready for your own wedding. Sometimes it's, I'm going to go on a hike or I'm going to go on a vacation. But meeting with them where they're at is so important. Um, John, what do you think about that? What are some creative and effective micro workouts that you've seen be successful?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole host of them, and actually a wide variety. I mean, I don't think there's a single type of workout that's obviously good for everybody. But if you own a gym, or if you're working the semi-private training model, and you incorporate intervals, whether it's just you're working with one person at a time or even 2, 3 people at a time, everyone's going to have different capabilities and abilities and different training experiences. So one of the more challenging parts is to you, the coach and the trainer, is to choose and select exercises that, yeah, they're standard or traditional exercises, but you know that the people in your group or that class can do the vast majority of them. They can actually like perform. And I think we were talking about this right before the show. I think that one of the biggest limitations, especially with like the Orange Theory types of business models or classes, and just HIIT training classes in general, is that they tend to kind of heavily push exercises that are too advanced, that the vast majority of people in those classes really should not be doing. Most people can't do, renegade rows or like Turkish get-ups, and some of these other highly skilled or highly technical exercises that they need to be at a beginning level for, right? So there's a progression, and even regression or modifications that people can really make. So it's up to the coach and trainer. I mean, there's bands, there's body weights, there's sliders, there's kettlebells. I mean, there's sleds, there's battle ropes. I mean, dumbbells. Like there's all kinds of equipment that people can use, and it's important that, okay, if somebody can't do an exercise with a dumbbell that maybe you prescribed, it's best to give them some type of other alternative or solution that they can do, right? Either substitute out for the next program, or they can't do this and they can just have an alternative like ready to go, right? So you need to structure the program, these micro workouts, that you feel that the vast majority of people can do. And that's the biggest difference, is a lot of coaches and trainers program things that they personally do, not what the client can actually perform, right? So that's a huge fallacy that a lot of coaches have, is that I tell coaches and trainers this all the time. I've even told past students this: never program something for a client or athlete that you have never done or performed in some type of capacity.
Yeah, because then the execution and the modeling may not be there, and the appropriate modifications, you won't understand the modifications. Aaron, what do you find about some of the creative and effective micro workouts? Now, I know you were talking about your training that you do for your marathons, and you incorporate HIIT into those things.
I want to say one thing about what Dr. Mike just said too. There was a former institution where I taught as an adjunct. This is an online program, and the institution's irrelevant to this. But something that's kind of interesting that he just mentioned was a lot of times trainers will prescribe exercise based on what they do or what they do in their workouts to someone who's not ready for that. And what was interesting is in this program, we had a number of students who were already working out in the field, and they had to design programs for case studies or somebody in their life or a client that they got. And oftentimes it came back as everything CrossFit, everything, all this high intensity workouts. And my feedback to them was always, this person is telling us that they are just beginning their exercise journey, and you have them doing all these crazy exercises because you like to do them. And I think it's a really important point to think about as you're working with clients, is what exercises are you putting them through, and are they appropriate for the level that they are at? So I just wanted to add that on, that I've seen that a lot in different students who are working out in the field. I'm not sure what the question was that you just gave me, but
no, but it was a great answer.
So.
And Greg, you own a studio. You hire instructors, you hire trainers, you manage your own clients. What are you seeing that, some of the creative and effective micro workouts that we can incorporate in? I mean, we've heard some of the negatives, but there's got to be, some before and afters that you've experienced that are really working.
And well, this kind of goes to like that HIIT has just been misconstrued over the years, but I find, especially when they're working with me and they have the ability to be coached, we can select certain exercises, things like med ball slams. That's a safe, non-impact versus something like a box jump or a burpee. Like I can't remember the last time I programmed a burpee. A lot of my clients are older. So it doesn't take a lot to get their heart rate up, especially if they're untrained. So sometimes it's just some light intervals on a piece of cardio equipment or something like med ball slams, or there's a lot of other things you can do that without really pushing the boundaries of form and technique. But once people start getting into it and they start getting those baselines, if they're on one of our fat loss programs, they're going to get their heart rate up just through resistance training. Like if you have the right amount of weight on a hex bar, you can get them into that 80 to 90% range that Dr. Mike was talking about. But that's once they've built that base. So what a lot of my clients, they're really looking for stuff like, what can I do when I'm not going to the gym and I don't have an hour to come here? So a lot of that is like, you can do a simple circuit of just like a lower body exercise and a push and a pull. And that could be different for everybody. For one person, it could be squats, just air squats. For an older adult, it could literally be sitting down and standing up onto a chair. You could do push-ups on the floor. You could do elevated push-ups. So again, it's still finding where your client's at and giving them the prescribed exercises. So I tend to do kind of full body circuits, so that way the heart rate can stay up versus like almost too long intervals, or having to wait till your legs rest before you do a leg exercise again. So it could be upper body, lower body, lower body, or lower body, upper body push, upper body pull, things like that. And that's just going to be depending on what they have at home, what they have available to them.
And what I like, what you guys are all highlighting is maybe HIIT has been a little bit overdone, a little bit bastardized, that it's been, it's the right thing for everyone, and maybe it's not, and maybe the exercises aren't. I was very interested to read that HIIT training is now in the top 20. It barely made the top 20 in the American College of Sports Medicine trend report that they just published. So it used to be in the top 10. It used to be, one of the top 5, but it's dropped down a bit. In the SCW, in our surveys, which we've reached almost over 2,000 people, same with ACSM, 2,000 people, HIIT is number 13. SCW tends to be more group exercise. ACSM tends to be more personal training. And John, why do you think this is happening? Is it the overuse of HIIT or misuse of HIIT or poor programming?
I think it's a combination of the two. I mean, it's I don't know if there's a certain percentage of over reliance and overblown, or I think a lot of it has to do with poor programming and perhaps the confusion of a lot of ridiculous social media accounts that like to constitute everything and categorize everything as like HIIT. But I think there's some other things that have pushed that back in terms of, number 13 or number 20. Likely like some of the wearable technologies that are moving up there in terms of assessments and all that. I mean, we know there's, almost all the conventions that we go out, there's always companies that are doing, fitness workouts and just tech, in general. And really since all the COVID stuff, I mean, there's been like tonal and some of these other home workout stuff that has likely been a little bit more popular in terms of, just the HIIT stuff, because with those types of equipment apparatuses, there a lot of those HIIT stuff is already pre-programmed, right? So they're getting in because it's pre-programmed. Obviously there's, there's benefits, and I mean, Tonal's lost, they lost a ton of money in the market share, but that's obviously a different conversation. But I think like just a combination of things. I mean, and you know what, Sarah, is I think really coming out of the last few years, I mean, people have really become more aware that they can get just as much, if not better, education, online, these private seminars, these webinars, and entrepreneurial types of events and training events in their local area or online, and it may not have to spend thousands of dollars to go to some type of national event they might used to go to. This, in other words, there's more options now versus 5 years ago. So there's a lot more information at our fingertips, but there's also a lot more confusion as well. So it's part of our job to filter through the BS and just give it to straight talk.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. There's so much online. We have started recording. We record about 100 sessions at each one of our conferences, but you can't stream it from a convention center. You can't stream it from a hotel. You can't have 6 cameras going on at a time because the hotel and the convention centers don't have the bandwidth. You might have it at your home. They don't have it at the hotels and the convention centers. So we're recording. We have 6 high-end cameras and we're recording these sessions and then we're putting them online. People love that. People love getting it online, but like you said, John, it's like, we've got to caution people, look for those certified instructors, look for those educators. You guys all have master's degree and a couple of you have PhDs. We've got to be careful what we're watching. Now, what strategies can we use to help our clients structure their days to effectively fit in their workouts and also do their workouts safely, have enough recovery time? Aaron, what do you think about that, or how would you respond to that?
Well, and I think the understanding, first of all, that short and efficient workouts can be incredibly effective, right? So I think it's been mentioned a couple of times here that, well, we get people who say, well, I only have 20 minutes. It's not worth it. I'm going to go do something else, right? But I think it becomes an educational piece for them to say that, hey, 20 minutes is enough, okay, right? Or 30 minutes is enough for you to get a good workout. And especially if you think about that from a consistency standpoint, hey, I only have 20 minutes a day, or I only have 30 minutes a day, but I know I can be consistent with those 20 to 30 minutes. And over the course of weeks, months, or the year, they can accomplish a lot by doing 20 to 30 minutes every single day, or 5 days a week, or whatever they'll commit to. So I think it's important to understand and educate clients of how important those 20 to 30 minutes can be, and what they can actually accomplish in those 20 to 30 minutes. And if they're at the gym, for example, we haven't talked a whole lot about single set to failure, for example. That's something that's crept up within research as well. Is that an approach that they end up taking, a single set exercise to failure? And is that their workout? And how can they be efficient in that way? So, and then too, with some of those intervals, if you're looking at cardiorespiratory endurance training, if they're doing those intervals, I mean, it traditionally is 10-ish minutes shorter in every workout at least. And you see a lot of the same benefits that you do in longer duration training for cardiorespiratory endurance training. So, I mean, I think it's just educating clients that 20 to 30 minutes might be enough. And here's how you can be efficient in that time.
Yeah, and John, I was going to ask you, I think you did a wonderful presentation on power training, and I think you even did something focusing on older adults. I think, Greg, you might have done that as well. That's a very interesting concept. What do you think of that? What do you think of, like what Aaron said with the single set?
I fully agree with that. And it's like, obviously the beginning of this talk was talking about HIIT, but I think what we're realizing is maybe we have moved away from HIIT. Like going back to why HIIT's kind of dropped in some of those standings. I love looking at those trend reports, but I think it says more about what has been bumped above it, including things like resistance training, personal training, individualized workout. I think 10 years ago, everyone was looking at dose, and that's when HIIT really came off. And for a while, I had to pull people away from like single muscle group training or split days, because they didn't have 6 days a week in the gym. But now what I actually am finding is, when I talk to my clients, I like mapping out their day. I like mapping out their week. I like mapping out their month. And I'm one of those people that the later in the day it gets, the less likely it is that I'm going to go to the gym. My battery gets low. So if I'm one of my clients, I'm going to say, we need to make sure that workout happens earlier in the morning. Maybe it is waking up a few minutes earlier, even if it's only 20 minutes. So whether it's a set to failure or just going back to, if you only get 20 minutes, if you can give me a single muscle group, if you can just hit glutes, hit a couple exercises, hit a couple sets, and that's your workout for that Monday, and you give me another 20 minutes on Tuesday, you can switch muscle groups. So I think HIIT it's changing. It is going away a little bit, because there's other options out there, and people are finding like you can get a great benefit. And I love hearing some of Dr. Mike's talks about power training and strength training. And I think, again, resistance training is starting to bump back up on that list. And I think that's one of the reasons why HIIT's dropping.
Yeah, and so you're absolutely right. Strength training is way up there. It's way up there for ACSM and for SCW. For SCW, it's number 3 in the focus. And for ACSM, they have let's see here. Personal training is number 10, but I'm not seeing strength training. Strength training must have dropped. Functional training was number 14, and that's about what I see. So ACSM even dropped a little bit in strength. But John, what were you going to comment on on the training?
Yeah, I mean, Greg's got, good points. I mean, I think the resistance training certainly has, moved up, and they hit on some good points there. I mean, because I think, you still have a large percentage of people in the United States that are still baby boomers. And they're one of the largest percent of individuals that not only need to do resistance training in terms of decrease of cardiovascular risk, decrease of risk of falls and fractures, and the power output training as well. You certainly throw in a lot of highly effective eccentric training with that as well, stuff that I've spoken about. But yeah, I mean, when people talk about like power training, it's like there's different camps, right? You have the camp of like the traditional strength and conditioning coaches, like cleans and snatches and that type of stuff. Whereas like power stuff for like older adults could be things like med ball slams, right? Or, higher intensity, battle ropes with just a little bit higher power output, for each repetition. So power output is relative, to the person. There's different ways to really define it. But it's customization depending on what type of demographic, that you're really working for. So, yeah, I mean, it's all effective, but it comes down to, who are you training? Why are they training that way? Why do they care? And how is it going to make them better?
Yeah, I like that.
I was going to say, I would go on top of that. I think, again, with the shift in the fitness industry, I think there's a wider demographic than ever before of people working out and training. Like just in this facility, my youngest athlete is 9, my oldest is 93. And most of them actually don't need HIIT training. So I think it was great to have the minimal effective dose, but now we're seeing people are coming into the gym for much, much more than just burning calories. And that's kind of where things are in the fitness industry at this point.
Yeah, and it's not about the burning of the calories. It's not about losing weight. It's about longevity. It's about vitality. It's about wellness. And that's really been a huge trend. Mental wellness has also made a huge surge. And it's made both of the charts, all over. And Greg, I was very interested when you talked about limiting the number of exercises people can do at home to make sure you're giving them that program for the full week when they're coming to your gym, and maybe they only see you once or twice a week. Do you know, with physical therapists, I found this fascinating. They really only like to give between 4 to 6 exercises for a client to do, and they limit it to under 15 minutes. Because I was doing this physical, this PT training, and because I had to rehab my knee. And I was shocked. I said, "You're giving me like 4 exercises. I can do this in 10 minutes." And she looked at me, she's like, "Sarah, we want you to do them."
Right.
People don't do them.
Yeah, I've worked in physical therapy clinics for almost 15 years, my entire career, and that's the truth. And it's a different demographic. Like some of those people don't want to work out. So if you give them more than 4 things, they're not going to do it.
Yeah, but it is and it isn't. Because here I am, this fitness person, and I'm going in and I'm getting 4 to 5 exercises. You know what I found? I was like, it was good. It was enough because I could integrate it into what I was doing. And I think we see these older adults, at least I'm seeing a lot of them, where these individuals they're older, but they're really concerned about staying healthy and not just living a long life, but living a fruitful life. And that's the active aging group. And you guys are talking about putting HIIT in active aging. Talk to me here. Like, John, what would you do to modify a strength training workout or a HIIT workout for an older adult?
I mean, you have to basically just kind of go to basics. I mean, Greg's right. I mean, most of these people that, clients, like, they don't, you may incorporate or sprinkle some in here and there, but the vast majority of people don't really need full 45 minutes to an hour's worth of like true, like I'm talking about true HIIT training. And the other thing about HIIT training that I forgot to mention earlier in the first question is people think HIIT training is something that you can do like 5 or 6 days a week and make progress. It is not. It is high physically demanding, it's high skill, and you're looking at 2, maybe 3 days a week max because it's such high demand on the nervous system, right? I mean, true HIIT training, it is like it's going to be a high physical demand to where you can't really sustain that type of level of intensity 5 to 6 days a week and think that you're going to continue to really make progress, right? So I think when you're working with older adults, most people just can't do a body weight squat, right? So if they can't do a body weight squat, have them do an assisted like TRX squat, or if they have trouble doing that, use a TRX like assistant squat, but put a box or some type of soft plyometric box underneath them. So then it becomes like a assisted box squat, for example. Instead of, worrying about barbell deadlifts, do a kettlebell, deadlift. It's easier in terms of technique. It's less skill demanding. It's less physical demanding. So basically what you're doing is that you need to think in terms of not only modifications of exercises, but what exercises or say variations can you do and incorporate that are less skill, less technically demanding, and less physically demanding, but yet they can still get an effective dose from that. And you essentially just take those, say the traditional lifts, and break them into little pieces and variations and have them do what they're able to really do. I mean, it's an endless number of possibilities, right? But you can't program person A for person B. I mean, there has to be enough individualization to where there's progressive overload continuously over time.
And I also like how you mentioned utilizing different equipment. And it's, yes, because it's lighter, but it's also easier to hold because as an older adult, the mobility and the strength in the hands and the extremities are weaker, yet we've got to work the back, we've got to work the chest, we've got to work the entire core. But if we're limited by the strength of our hands or the flexibility and range of motion in our shoulder girdle, that's a hard call. Aaron, do you have any special recommendations for older adults, not just strength, the strength training, but also the HIIT training and the cardiovascular training?
I think one of the things that I really tried to focus on, I worked with older adults in the gym space. Our average age was about 87 in the gym for about 13 years prior to being in education. And I think one of the things that I quickly transitioned from, and I'm really glad that we kind of went down this route of power training for older adults. It's definitely a passion of mine. When we start to think about, and Greg and Mike have both said wonderful things already about this, but just kind of when we think about how do we add on, I quickly realized how important the power, or I'll even say plyometric type training was for older adults when it came to functionality for them. And I think that when we think about older adults and we think about the fact that power or skeletal muscle power is one of the things that declines first and declines fastest in older adults. I mean, I look at it as our duty in the fitness industry then to say, how can we at least help those older adults potentially hold that off or even flip that around to the other side? And that ultimately becomes about functionality for those older adults, right? So how can we think of the things they're doing every day in their activities of daily living? And that might be a chair stand, right? How can we make, and Dr. Mike mentioned the kind of some of those TRX squatting or squatting onto a chair. How can we mimic those activities of daily living for older adults in the gym space and utilize the same movement patterns that they utilize for activities of daily living, and then have them move fast, if you will? And when we think about power, when we think about skeletal muscle power, strength in the concept of time or speed of that movement, right? So how can we take some of those same movement patterns and put them into a power or a speed strength type movement? And so I really tried to focus on that. And I quickly figured out that that's what the clients needed more than just sitting down, putting a 2-pound weight on their foot and kicking it out and back and out and back, like we see in so many classes for older adults, and started to say, how can I make my older adults more functional? And that was through power training, right? So if we were on a machine, that how could they move that weight fast? If they were able to use their body weight, how can we put that into a plyometric setting and get some of those same plyometric responses?
I do a lot of training with pickleball, and it's that, and I think HIIT training really works very well because you feel like you're standing there and waiting, and then you boom, you've got to act, and you're standing there and you're waiting, and then boom, you've got to act. So I hear you on that, Aaron. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that type of program, like a HIIT type of program, would also work really well in that type of setting. Greg, I'm going to ask you, what are some common challenges and excuses that you hear from your clients when attempting this limited time, and how can we address this? Now, we didn't say this in the, we're going to be talking about this next month, I think, adhering to your resolutions, but we have to look at this. These people make resolutions. Do you know that according to URSA, 11% of the entire membership base of a health club joins in January, which is huge, okay? But then 80% of those people quit within the next month. Like, how do we retain these people? Is it going to do it? So what are the common challenges and how do we face them?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of the biggest common challenges is the whole purpose of this talk is everyone said I don't have enough time, whether it's kids, work, several other things. I mean, a lot of times it's just like it's going to take 30 minutes to get to the gym, or it's going to take 20 minutes to do this. So part of that is taking away that, like, what can we do first thing in the morning without leaving the house? But also, again, that's why I like to break down their day. Because a lot of time, the reality is people have more time than they think. 24 hours is a long time. 8 hours, assuming they're getting 8 hours of sleep, which most people don't, you still get 16 hours a day. Assuming you're working long days like me, and like say you're working 10 to 12 hours, you still have time. So part of it is finding where that time is or blocking it. Like if you have 10 minutes here and 10 minutes here, can you get that 20-minute workout in like right after work before you get home? Because if you take that extra time to go home, to go get your stuff, to go get your equipment, you're just less likely to go to the gym. So a lot of it is just time blocking your day, figuring out what they need, where they need it, and what's the best opportunity to take advantage of that 20 minutes, even if it's only 20 minutes.
And I saw you nodding your head, John. Contribute, please.
Yeah, I mean well, Greg's absolutely right. I mean, most people think they don't really have time, but the reality is they do have time. They're just not making the time or prioritizing it into specific time blocks. The saying goes, like, if it's not on your calendar, like, it's probably not going to happen. I mean, you could take a look at someone's calendar, and they're trying to get their life together, whether it's through training or, making more money or being more organized. Like, it says a lot about you, how structured your day is and what your calendar really looks like, right? I'll show you somebody who's really successful and makes money and does great, and I can see their calendar. There's a very large high quality correlation with that as well. So yeah, I mean, people think you have to be in the gym 6 days a week and train for like 2 or 3 hours. That's not the case at all. I don't even do that, right? I mean, the most I do is like 5, and one of those is like a cardio conditioning day, right? So I mean, I train 4 days a week, and sometimes I even do it like when I travel, just so I can stay on track and be consistent and get something in. So but Greg's right. When people say they don't have time, they actually do have time. They're just not prioritizing it and organizing it in the way to create their own personal system so that they can be and hold themselves accountable.
Yeah, they say if you're not setting a plan, you're planning to fail. So it's pretty interesting. I think I heard that in a recent movie. Who knows? And then how can we ensure that time optimized workouts remain safe and effective even with these shorter durations? Like, Greg, how do we make sure that these workouts are safe and effective?
Well, I mean, I kind of feel like that's kind of been kind of the theme of today. It's finding the right exercise for the person. In like going back to whether they're doing it or not, it's making sure they understand their goal. A couple quick things that have kind of been glanced over, like if you're not actually sitting down and talking to your client, like assess them, like get a consultation, understand why they're there, B, as we're talking about aging adults, you now have to think about medications. So if you have people on medications, things like beta blockers, they can't do in high intensity. So when it comes down to what people need to do, it is. And I know this is a horrible answer in the fitness industry, but it depends. It really just depends on the client. But make sure you're sitting down with that client, making sure they understand why they're doing something. And with my clients that go home, I want to see them in the gym doing something. If they're doing an advanced lift, I want to see them do it. I want to know they know how to do it. And I want to know that I can trust them to do it on their own before I give it to them at home. I'm not going to go ask them to buy all this equipment that I have in here and expect them to do these full body workouts. So it's like finding what they're willing to do with what they have available and programming from there.
And Aaron, I saw you also nodding your head in agreement. And you have this expertise with older adults. How can we make sure that these things are safe and effective?
I think especially as we talk about older adults, as I think about those in their 50s or 60s and above, I think it is the idea of how do we safely progress them through the idea of, do they have the basic movement pattern needed for this exercise before they're able to do it? If they don't have that movement pattern, how can we train that movement pattern? Or, is machine training more appropriate for them from a safety standpoint? But I just think it's understanding, especially with older adults, where they are, and to Greg's point, what is their goal and where do they want to get to? But most importantly with older adults is, can they safely go through that movement pattern to do that exercise? Because as soon as you add external resistance to that exercise, it becomes much more unsafe if their movement pattern isn't proper for that movement. So, I think a lot of times people say, well, I don't want to do body weight. I want weights. I want to feel like I'm doing something, but they need those movement patterns first. And, ultimately that becomes the first step to any safety factor.
Right. And so building that, John, any contributions on that?
Yeah, I mean, he's got a good point. I mean, even when I've done a lot of hands-on stuff, depending on what it is, particularly if it's like overhead press work or deadlift or whatever it is, everything looks good. Like if it's like body weight or a dowel rod or an empty barbell, but once you start putting weight on there and as you become stronger, your technique often does and can change, right? Depending on your own specific like biomechanics and your leverages. It's less of that way when you're dealing with machines because you're at a fixed position. But nowadays you have equipment companies like Atlantis, especially Prime, to where you can kind of overload the resistance profile within the given range of motion. So it could be heavier at the beginning, modest at the mid-range, and easiest, toward the end range, and vice versa. There's different combinations. But yeah, I mean, when you start putting on resistance, I mean, things change very quickly, right? So this is why you have to maintain, effective movement patterns. But, if you, the coach and trainer, if you don't know all the ins and outs and biomechanics of lifting, like you're going to have a hard time coaching your clients on that stuff, which is, and I've said this many times before, if all your experience is like, bodybuilding, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's still pretty popular, but if all is that, then that's all that you're going to be able to really program. So if your experiences, and even exposures are limited, then it's going to limit your ability to program for a wide variety of demographics and different types of clients, even if they have, similar goals. So those are some things that people need to watch out for.
Well, this has been really great. And I thank you, Dr. Jonathan Mike, Greg Johnson, Dr. Aaron, and again, I can't do the last name, but you guys have been wonderful. This is really terrific. I'm quickly just gonna share my screen here so that you guys can see. We have our DC Mania coming up. We have over 30 different sessions on personal training alone, which is kind of exciting. DC Mania is going to be February 23rd through 25th. And we have our California Mania convention coming up March. Oh my gosh, I'm doing the wrong dates. Carter, what is it? Is it the 24th through 26th? And we have all these wonderful sponsors with us at the conference. So we look forward to seeing you guys at one of the upcoming Mania conventions. Please take a look. We've got specials going on where you can save $100 off the conference. So please check your emails. And we look forward to seeing you in 2024 at an upcoming conference. And again, Aaron, Greg, and John, you guys are the best. Thank you. Everybody have a great night. And thank you, Carter, for running this wonderful webinar. Take care, guys.